Hi, everyone. So before we begin, I will share a couple of procedural items. So first off, the chat has been disabled. Throughout this panel today, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to pose any questions to our speakers. And we will make time to discuss your questions in the more Q&A portion at the end of this panel. A survey will also be released at the end of the webinar, so we get a sense of what people want to hear more of from the webinar series. And this webinar is being recorded and will be posted to AVA's YouTube channel shortly. So you can revisit and share this and look at our previous webinars and panels. So that link will be in the chat momentarily. So hi, everyone. Welcome to the Alliance Against Violence Webinar Wednesdays. I'm your host, Alexandria Lizochuk, a master's student at the University of Calgary in community health sciences, specializing in population and public health. I am also the AVA online coordinator and the host of the AVA Her Health podcast. I'm joining you today from the traditional and ancestral territory of Treaty 7. Mohkinstsis, or the city of Calgary, is also home to Métis Nations within Alberta, so the Nose Hill Métis District 5 and Alba Métis District 6. On behalf of AVA, I want to begin by acknowledging that on a national level, we encourage all Canadians and visitors to Canada to learn about the Indigenous peoples of the lands on which they live, work, visit, play on, and become engaged allies together. We as Canadians, in the spirit of truth and reconciliation, respect the self-determination of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and their rights and responsibilities in cultures, languages, and the pursuit of wellness. The focus of today's panel is research readiness, and we are joined by Carrie McManus and Dr. Connie Cheung. Carrie is the Director of Innovation and Programs at Sagesse, where she breaks down barriers and drives change. Her passion for eradicating domestic abuse fuels her innovative approach to developing initiatives that challenge beliefs and empowers communities. Under her leadership, Sagesse has expanded to address domestic abuse in rural and remote areas, sex work, and underserved communities. With over 20 years of experience, she previously worked at Mount Royal University's Stepping Up program and holds a Bachelor's of Arts from Dalhousie University and a Diploma of Social Work from Mount Royal University. Dr. Cheung is a social-focused leader who brings together innovation, research, and real-world wisdom to elevate the quality of social services. Connie specializes in implementation leadership using strong measurement strategies to track service impact and guide meaningful change. She's passionate about integrating evidence into both strategic and clinical decision-making, and she continues to build sector-wide capacity for evidence-informed practice. Whether working with teams, clients, or community partners, Connie is committed to making lasting difference through thoughtful, data-driven approaches. So thank you so much, too, for coming and joining me today. I'm really excited to hear you speak. Today, I'll be posing questions to both Carrie and Connie about how they use research evidence in their work and why it's important for strengthening programs and services. Questions will also highlight how these organizations collaborate with academics, researchers outside their network, the barriers they face in applying evidence, and the strategies that they've developed to overcome these challenges, and to ensure that research is effectively informing practice going forward. So thank you so much for joining me today. I really wanted to start about having a conversation about research and organizational value. So both of you in nonprofits, nonprofit missions are centered on service delivery and social impact. In this context, how do you determine if research findings are truly relevant and adaptable to unique needs, the cultural context, and the lived experiences of the communities your organization serves? So I see Connie first, if you don't mind starting us off.
No, thank you. I think that's a really great question, because often from my experience, that an area of opportunity is, you have access to research, but how do you integrate that into social service delivery? And what we do here at LOFT is we use an evidence-informed practice framework. So this is it's a standardized way of collecting information so that we're able to make an informed decision. And one of the key areas that we consider is research evidence. So we look at trends, we look at impact, but then we also evaluate or synthesize research in relation to what the context is. So what is the client experiencing? Or if it's a program, what is the program experiencing? we bring in client preferences. So what do clients want? What do families want in this situation? And then the fourth area is from an organizational perspective, how historically have we approached this question? And do we have any biases in how we've responded? So really it's about joint decision making. We would invite different individuals across the practice continuum, and we'd have a large group discussion about a certain topic. And I think through this process, what we found very valuable is that you're able to articulate how a decision is made. And so there's a higher level of transparency and accountability. And I think from this experience, it really reflects the idea that although research evidence is important, it's not always the only piece or the only consideration when making a decision in practice. And so we try to use this strategy, this tool, when we're working through complex decisions. So I've done it with leaders, done it with programs. And I think, at the end of the day, it really gives us an opportunity to bring in that research evidence that's relevant, and then really synthesizing it with other pieces of information so that your decision making is informed.
Thank you. I'll invite Carrie to join in our first question.
Great, thank you. I'd love to just say ditto to everything that Connie said, but that would make for a very short webinar if I did that throughout. So I think the only thing that I'll kind of expand on, at Sagesse, we have the same sort of values, right? It's what research is one thing, but if our clients say absolutely not, or no, or that doesn't track, if the community is having a very different lived experience, then I'm always going to go from a community and client perspective. That is my bias, but I think it's also my grounding as a service provider. And I think that, I'm excited to have this conversation today because I think that, the best research partnerships that I have had have been ones where we've been able to say, my grounding as a service provider says something very different than what this research says that's coming out. And sure, it's gone through all of their, correct methodology and peer review and all of that, but it still doesn't track. And so that's, I think, one of the things that Sagesse is always thinking about. The other thing that I think about is a number of years ago, I was chatting with some colleagues in Australia, and they were talking about a model that they had where if when applying for grants, they didn't have research from within the past 5 years that was contextually specific and relevant to the issue, that there would be funding for research that would go along with it. And so, one, I felt insanely jealous about that idea. And I thought, how do I get that in Canada? But I think that it really stuck in my brain from that idea of part of my role within the organization is to say, if there feels like there's all of those gaps, if I look at it and go, I see what the research is saying, but community is telling me something different, I have the ability to go back and say, I think that there's a gap here, and can we contribute to that changing or to dealing with that? Because I think that if we don't address it or we don't point out where those exist, then we continue to just have this divide between service organizations and researchers. And so one of the things that Sagesse is always looking at is, does this track and does this fit? And if not, why? And is there a way to be able to try to bridge that gap or increase where we see that there is a lack of knowledge or information that aligns with what communities are telling us?
And I think to kind of build on what Carrie is saying, I think the involvement from community partners has to be meaningful in a sense that there's participation at the decision-making level, so that it really is bringing together these different areas of wisdom, so that not only is knowledge that's generated can inform, right, the knowledge base, but also inform how we support individuals. And I think until that integration happens more consistently, it's sometimes there is a disconnect between the knowledge that research generates and how it's applied you know, in the applied setting.
Mhm.
Thank you so much, you two, for diving into that. I really love that you emphasize that it all has to go down to the contextual context of like your clients or people that you work with, for research to inform to better your clientele and your community. And we'll definitely dive into this a little bit, how it's really important, that you have to be advocates to your community. And when entering into a research partnership, why we might need to consider conversations with researchers or academics that want to partner with in the future. But we'll touch on that a little bit later. Um, to kind of break down, collaborative methods are very crucial for bridging the gap between research and real world application. Integrated knowledge translation, as a definition, is an approach where researchers and knowledge users, so that could be anyone that uses knowledge, so people with experiencers, care providers, governments, policymakers, things like that. They use this knowledge through sustained partnerships, and they typically engage throughout the whole research process, from defining the question or the research question to then apply all the way to applying the findings in the end. Can you both share an example where your organization was involved in co-defining a research question, and how did that early engagement impact the eventual like usefulness and adoption of the results? I'll start with you, Carrie, this time.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I think one of my first big research projects that I was part of at Sagesse was exactly this. It was a project where we have a unique service delivery at Sagesse. We offer peer support programming. Peer support is very well known and very well used in some sectors within civil society, but not so much within domestic abuse and not within a group kind of environment. And so we wanted to be able to talk about the sort of efficacy of that and what does that look like. Um, and we met with a researcher who said, you know, we could do X, and she sort of outlined something, and I said, yeah, it sounds a little boring. And she said, I agree. I also think it sounds a little boring. I have had this other idea. And she said, you know, I want to do this thing where we test cortisol, because there's, you know, we can test a stress hormone in a hair sample. And if you test in a hair sample, then you can test, you know, back 6 months and then after group. And so through that process, we were able to co-design something of what is the unique story that Sagesse is looking to tell. How do we design something that reflects our values as an organization, which is that we are an innovative organization. We are always looking at what is the sort of next opportunity to learn and get better at what we're doing, not have somebody tell us that what we're doing is okay. We want to know, like, if it's not okay, I actually want to know that. I mean, I sat in panic when the report came in to say whether there was a significant change within hair samples, because I thought, what if it happens that like it's actually the opposite? But I think that process was so interesting for us because we were able to, I didn't have the idea of cortisol. That came from our research partner. And she'd had the idea, but didn't have a partner to be able to implement it with. And so through that co-design process, we were both able to not even start with sort of the outline of what is the goals that we're trying to achieve, but what are some of the questions that we have? What are some of the curiosities that are living in our brains that right now we don't have a place for? And could we figure out a way to design research questions around that and then make a study? And so that for me was huge. It was really monumental in terms of my own learning as somebody who is embedded in the community and in the organizations of you know, I've since done lots of research projects with folks where they come in with something pre-designed and I kind of slide myself in, and it's just a totally different experience than me being able to say, here's the thing I'm curious about, and her being able to say, here's the thing I'm curious about, and then us finding a balance together.
And I agree with what Carrie is saying. I think some of the best partnerships is when your roles are clearly defined, in that there is meaningful contribution coming from both partners. I also find the funding system is more conducive to the partnerships. So we had a very similar experience So during COVID, there was a huge spike in loneliness in some of the seniors and older adults that we worked with. And we were able to lead a grant application, of which an academic partner became part of the funding proposal, where we would deliver the service, but the content and the curriculum came from the academic, and the evaluation also came from the academic. And I think that that partnership was really great, because we were able to build capacity, I think, internally, you know, with almost like a train the trainer model, where the goal is to build capacity across the team. And now this curriculum is implemented across about 8 of our sites across LOFT. Because there was so much focus on implementation and sustainability, right? So it wasn't just a research project where data was collected, and, you know, results were generated and knowledge was generated, but really there was a focus and emphasis on building capacity across the team so that they could sustain and carry the curriculum forward within their programs. So I think I've been seeing a lot more of those collaborations, which I really value, because I think that's really where the mutual beneficial kind of partnerships are established, and the experience can help both stakeholder groups grow and build capacity.
Yes, thank you so much. I agree that like that building that trust and having equitable relationships, really defining clear roles of the researcher and the academic and the partnership, really ensures that research reflects community priorities, as we mentioned before, but it's also very mutually beneficial. Thank you, Connie, for really diving into like the train model, and you're building capacity within your organization to for this partnership to be beneficial beyond the research itself. So I truly appreciate it. Going back into the questions, an essential first step in partnership readiness and in the literature that I've read so far is assessing a goodness of fit, which is defined as the compatibility and the sustainability of a partnership for a proposed project. So given that trust and shared values are very critical indicators, how do you assess a potential academic partner's compatibility alongside their respect, transparency, and potentially their culture of humility before committing to a long-term collaboration? And I'll allow you, Connie, to start this conversation.
Sure. So this was a hard question. It gave me a pause. I think, kind of reflecting on my experience, I think, you know, partnership is a mindset. And I think there are core values embedded within that mindset. For me, some of the characteristics that I value is this openness to multiple perspectives. So I think if a researcher or even an external partner is open to hearing feedback and input from folks across the practice continuum, for me, that's indication that, you know, this belief that it truly does take multiple perspectives to kind of create the best possible project and to have research relevant. I think one thing that I've noticed, so I've been kind of working in the applied field for about 15, 20 years, and I've noticed that there has been a shift in academically trained individuals who want a position in the applied setting. And so with that, what happens is that now there's also capacity within the applied setting to meet researchers where they're at. And so I feel the readiness of an organization, you know, can shift depending on who is on the team. And so there is more collaboration, meaningful collaboration, because there just simply is more capacity and more resources dedicated to these types of partnerships. I don't know if I answered the question, but let me see what else. I think that's, yeah, and I think, you know, personality is a big one, right? There's some folks that you just get along with, and I think that plays into the dynamic sometimes as well.
Definitely.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that when I think about goodness of fit, I think about the places where I have not done that, and I've been in something and then gone, oh, this is going to be hard.
Yeah.
And part of it was about my ability to recognize the opportunity for me to say no, or for me to seek different partners, feeling less reliant on the academic partners because it's not a skill set that I have, right? And I think that that can often happen in nonprofits, is that if it's not my skill set, then I'm kind of willing to take what I can get from somebody else who's going to fill in the gaps of the thing that I don't know. And so I've gotten much better at being able to say, I'm going to take my time. I'm going to figure out where the right place is for this, and not. Um, we at Sagesse get asked all the time to participate in things, pretty constantly. And so we've actually created like a simple little checklist for us of like, what are we going to say yes to? Who are we going to be in partnership with, and who are we not? In the same way that we would if somebody came in and said, I want to volunteer with your organization or anything like that, right? That you sort of recognize that there's a capacity to enjoy working with somebody, and there's a capacity to um, not enjoy necessarily working with somebody, but still have the common goals of the thing that you're trying to achieve. And so I think being able to kind of differentiate that has been really important for us. I mean, I also am, I'm a big advocate of like, find somebody you like and then just like never let them go. And so that's not possible for everybody, but part of my strategy for sure is like, what this person and I share all of these values. And we know that because we've done this one project, which means the next time I have a project, I'm going to automatically go to that person. And maybe they're not the right person, but I'm going to use a little bit of my sort of leverage of relationship, or transfer of relationship and trust, to say, like, if you're not the person, do you have somebody in your world that you think is the right person? And trust that if they know what it's like to work with me, that they're going to recommend somebody that's also going to be a good fit in that way.
Yeah, definitely. I want to really highlight what you mentioned. I'm going to put this as a quote, like the opportunity to say no. Talking to community leaders in my own master's research, there's so many experiences of them feeling like they are used for appearances rather than a genuine connection for
Mhm.
research. And it is really important. I really just want to advocate for nonprofit organizations who are maybe interested in research and feel like that they have to participate in a partnership because of X, Y, and Z funding or whatnot, that they can say no if they don't feel like it's the correct partnership going forward. And I hope you agree with that statement.
Totally. Totally. You can say no and you can find somebody else. It is like finding somebody that is going to work for you, right? In the same way that you do interviews and you don't hire everybody. I think that if we, from a community partnership perspective, thought about research partners in the same way, we would say, well, yeah, like, I actually wouldn't want to work with this person on a regular basis. Well, if you don't want to work with them on a regular basis in your office, you probably also don't want to work with them on a regular basis as a research partner.
And I think it has to do with like a shared vision, right? Like if you have a shared vision, then it's much easier to navigate it together
Yeah.
because the expectations and the goals are similar in that sense. So I find that really helpful as well when we're able
And
to.
when you come across conflict, that shared vision is going to allow you to get
Yeah,
real clear about how you
yeah,
manage that.
exactly. Exactly. And sometimes I find, depending on the readiness of the organization, they may not know kind of how to advocate for themselves or, what they can ask for and when they can say no. And I think sometimes the onus, should be on the researcher to communicate that. It's almost like informed consent, right?
Mhm.
So I think that would be tremendously helpful in fostering that trust and relationship building for sure.
And I'm going to say, I think has very vast negative consequences when that doesn't happen,
Mhm.
because it makes community partners feel like this is a token. I'm just here for you to get the thing that you want, and then you're going to go away. And it's going to reduce your desire to want to work in partnership moving forward, because you're going to feel like you don't have any agency in it. And so I think that I agree, Connie. I think that there is a huge responsibility on academic partners to be able to be clear about what their roles and opportunities are and where people can speak up, and building an environment where it feels like it's comfortable to do that. Because again, I've worked with researchers before where I have come back and said, I'm not sure that I agree. And they were like, okay, well, you're wrong. And it goes, well, that's that should not be the answer, right? That
Right,
should never
right.
be the answer. Even if I don't agree, and even if I am technically wrong from a research methodology perspective or whatever, the answer has to be, let's talk about this and let's understand what's going on. But I think that, if somebody has that and that's their first experience, it's gonna create a bigger divide in terms of that role and that space between research and community.
Yeah, thank you so much for diving into that. I think this really flows really beautifully into the next question. That a really common challenge in academic knowledge user partnerships is the idea of a two-culture problem. The idea that the cultures of academics or researchers may differ significantly from knowledge users. So I'm curious at what specific organizational or timeline mismatches do you find most challenging when aligning with like academic partners, and how do you navigate those differences? And I forgot who went first last time, so I'm gonna go with Carrie because you're right next to me.
Perfect. Um, I think so. For me, I think that most significant sort of mismatch that I have had um is the set goals for the project. So if I find if somebody comes to me and says, I have this idea, I want to do this project because I think this is the thing we're going to learn. That's really different than somebody saying, I want to do this project and I have no idea what we're going to learn and I have no idea where we're going to go. And for me, from a sort of mismatch perspective, I am like, absolutely, let's ask the questions and then be open to what happens. So when I talk about the cortisol research, so I remember calling on a research partner as we sent the data away to be analyzed for the cortisol. I remember calling them and saying, like, what are we gonna do if it comes back and says that like people have higher cortisol levels after? Like, how are we gonna talk about this? And she was like, we're gonna take the information, we're gonna talk about why that might be and what's going on, and we're gonna contextualize it within the whole of the experience, and we're gonna figure out a way to use it. We're not gonna shy away from what the data tells us. And I think that for me, that ability to say like, we might have to change mid-course, or we might have to shift, or we're gonna get new information and we need to do something with that information. For me, um, has been the most challenging in working with and aligning with academic partners, right? Is if you're somebody that comes in and you're really certain, um, that you already know the answer and you already have this and you're just trying to get the background to sort of fill in the gaps, that's not really going to work. And I think that, again, part of this is about, it is about that pre-relationship piece and how do you sort of work that out. But I think it's also for me about being really clear from the beginning, right? Sagesse is an organization that is focused on innovation and learning, which means I'm going to follow the data wherever it goes, and that is really important. And so when we set up what our design is going to be, that has to be really clear that that's the thing that we're doing, and that if that comes up and we get information and we don't know what to do with it, that's something that we together have to deal with. Because again, I think that goes back to the very first question, which is around that contextualization, right? If you think you're going to get a certain answer and you get something different, well, as a researcher, you probably can't fully understand that until you contextualize that within the data, the timeline, one of the parts of this cortisol research that we did fell over COVID, right? And so, well, that makes things totally different in terms of what we're doing and how we contextualize. And so I think that for me being really clear about what are my values and what are the perspectives and the learning outcomes that I come into the project with at the beginning helps so that when we hit those mismatches, we have the ability to come back to what's the thing that's really grounding us? Why are we here? What's the goals? Because if you walk in with a different set of goals and you don't talk about those different sets of goals, you're going to have mismatches, and then you're not going to have the capacity to say anything, because you're going to say, I thought we were doing X, and they're going to say, I thought we were doing Y. And so I think for me, that's the thing that I always sort of think about, is that there will be mismatch in some ways, but as long as our goals are the same, then you can work through those differences, because you can say, we're still trying to achieve this X. And for me, it's almost always a learning outcome. I'm just trying to just gather more information. Now, how do I look at that differently than what I thought I was going to get? I don't know that that answered the question, but it felt like what I wanted to say.
No,
Definitely.
Carrie, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think, that shared goal is so important to the success of a project. And I think through my experience as well, I'm really appreciating the importance of enabling structures in place, governance structures, so that there are the regular check-ins, there are the regular, hey, are we on the right track, right? And sometimes it's that structure that will support kind of that continuous trust building and partnership for a project, for sure. I think from my perspective as well, a mismatch that I often see is the implementation pieces of it. So, for example, if there is a new project and we are introducing a new practice, it's very difficult sometimes for teams to integrate that new practice into their workflow. And so having a dedicated implementation specialist or a person who really does work with the team to change behavior, uptake of the new behavior, that has been very beneficial in my experience, because that speaks to the sustainability and scalability, right, of the new practice. And often when that's missing, we lose a big opportunity to build capacity, I think, across the sectors and across, with the academics as well. So that's
Well,
something.
and then we're just doing research for research sake, as opposed
Exactly.
to research to make
Yeah.
change. Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate you, Connie, talking about implementation science. So, being new to this field as a master's student, I took an implementation science course, and they were talking about barriers and opportunities. And they mentioned that typically the lack of knowledge about something is a very low barrier. Typically, people in partnerships know what they're doing. They've done this for a long time. They have tons of experience, and just chatting and looking into the literature is looking that direct funding to human organizations, and as well as like feeling that there's a mismatch on priorities as barriers are bigger than it is the lack of knowledge when having these partnerships. So I appreciate that they both, yeah, just integrating all this knowledge all together is making sense, at least to my head. So I appreciate you both diving into those mismatches and how you're navigating those. So I appreciate it. A very fun topic to talk about is power asymmetries. And it frequently persists in research collaborations, unfortunately, and is often reinforced by academic control over like factors of like grant funding and publication outputs and those kind of pressures. What are some concrete steps should academics take to redistribute power and ensure equitable decision making for community partners? So I want to start with you, Connie.
Sure. So the first thing that comes to mind when I think about this is training at the graduate level. I think to support change, I think there needs to be a culture shift where research is just as important as actionable items or application. And I think one of the best opportunities to instill this way of thinking is through our graduate training curriculum. And I've noticed a huge shift, even since the time when I graduated. There are a lot more opportunities for graduate students to do a placement. Even AVA has the Triadic Mentorship Program, which I thought was a great experience, not only for myself, but for the student and the academic partner. And it really gave us an opportunity to instill both sets of principles in the student, and hopefully, you know, by shifting the way we approach graduate training, we're able to foster like a new generation of more of researchers who also have an implementation mindset in the work that they do. So that's something that, you know, I feel strongly about, and I appreciate the shift. Another thing that I've noticed is the funding. So I think I mentioned this before, that there are a lot more opportunities now for partnership grants where the expectation is for the community partner to play a more meaningful role in the research and the execution of the research. But lately, there's also funding just for the community partner to lead something like knowledge mobilization. And I think it's a great way to shift some of the power dynamic. And I think that's a great opportunity for the academic community to really support the community partner in building their capacity, right? With grant writing and conceptualization and how to link knowledge to practice. So all those, I think through those opportunities, it really does break down some of the power dynamics, I think, that can exist between academia and the community. I don't know, Carrie, what you think, if you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I totally agree. I think the other thing that I think about is that, you know, it feels slightly differently if you think about this from a power asymmetry perspective, also in terms of like, you as an academic want access to people, and you want to ask them questions, and you want to know things that are going on, and you don't have that if you don't work with community, right? And so what if we think about the power less as an asymmetry of like, you get to make these decisions, but more of a place of equity of, there are some things that as the community partner, the power lives with me, with in terms of implementation, in terms of knowledge mobilization, in terms of connection to people with lived experience, actual community engagement, you know, all of that. That's the thing that we're good at. That's our expertise. That's where we lie, right? And so you can be a researcher who has all kinds of money and all kinds of opportunities to publish, but if you don't have people that are actually willing to talk to you, then you also don't have the ability to do your thing. And so when I think about the power asymmetries, I think about it less on a focus of, you have these things and I don't have them, and therefore I can't sort of make this. And I will say 100%, this is governed by the kinds of researchers that I work with, because I work with researchers who 100% say, these are the things that we have and bring in, and these are the things that you bring in, and then collectively, how do we build this? Because we need everybody to be involved and to be part of that. And so I think that for me, I often think about that, and this is part of a conversation I have with my staff team. Again, when we get asked on a regular basis for people who want to do research, you know, we always say like, yes, everybody wants access to our clients. How do we ensure that they have an understanding of what that means and the responsibility, and we know where and how that information is going to be used, because they might have power in these different ways, but we have power, have access, right? And so how do we balance that and create more of an equitable sort of role, and say, we don't have the same kinds of power, but we both bring power into the relationship. And let's not be scared of that, but let's talk about what that means and how we're going to address that and deal with it. There's a question in the Q&A that came up that I think sort of is around this, right? Is around this sort of idea of how academics might bulldoze people, use their sort of interests to be able to sort of drive what they're looking for. And I think it's interesting that the question around, how do you prepare organizations for if a conflict of interest comes up, or if information comes forward that doesn't sort of paint or contribute to the organization in the way that they feel like they should. And I think this goes back to a pre-readiness question around at the beginning, when you're building those relationships, you should be having conversations about power and role and what ifs, right? I feel like I don't go into a research project without saying, what if this says something totally opposite than what I think it's going to? What if this gives me information that actually, we as social services are the problem and we should get out of the way because actually we're not needed or whatnot. And so as a community organization, I have to be prepared for that. And I think that it's important to have those conversations up front as part of that understanding also of power, right? What if, the money runs out? Who's going to do the rest of the work? What if, you know, publication wants to happen and it doesn't align with us? Like, I think that's all part of the pre-conversations that you're having with researchers so that you don't get in it and go, oh my God, we're halfway through and you've decided to do something that totally doesn't align.
Which I think is why the governance structure is so important, because it will allow you to have those regular touch points, because things can also change, right? Like the organization may not have the resources anymore to
Totally.
support research projects. So I think the more transparent the communication can be, and more timely, the better to troubleshoot if these situations come up. So Carrie, as you're speaking, it also kind of like it sparks in me the importance of co-creation when it comes to knowledge mobilization, right?
Mhm.
Being able to contribute to how the data is interpreted, how the data is applied. And I think, it's a great way to build capacity. And there's actually a lot of folks who are interested in this area, right? And
Totally.
it's about within the organization, how do we identify these champions so that we can build that learning culture across the different teams.
Mhm.
So that's another, I think another workaround, how we can balance out some of the dynamics a little bit.
Mhm.
Well, thank you so much for both tackling my question as well as the audience question. That's no easy feat. Well, definitely, if the question asker has any more, we can definitely come back if they want more specific examples. But thank you guys for really diving into that. To kind of go into more readiness and the sustainability aspect I'm really interested in is my question for you is the organizational readiness for change framework highlights commitment and efficacy as very key. What are strategies can leaders use to foster a research culture and allocate scarce resources like staff time, funding, equipment to really create meaningful participation? And I will start with, I'll go with Carrie. I keep on forgetting.
I was really hoping you were going to go with Connie so I could just say
Oh,
ditto to that one. No, it's okay. I mean, I think that this is, I don't know that I have the answer to the allocation of scarce resources. Um, but let me start with the fostering research culture. So I think that this comes from fostering a culture of learning, fostering a culture of innovation, fostering a culture within an organization where we say, not we do this because we've always done this, but we say we do this because we know that it's the thing that is the most needed in community. And as soon as community tells us that that's not the thing that they need anymore, we're going to do something different. And that I think has massive implications from a community organization perspective that have nothing to do with research, but absolutely have all of the implications about that do have to do with research and the ability to sort of be in a research culture, right? If I worked in an organization where we felt like, well, we know everything that we need to know about peer support and domestic abuse, well, we would just stop, right? And we wouldn't be in a research place because we would say, no, we got it. We did a bunch of research, we built a program, now we just deliver that program. And so I think that from the top, there has to be a belief that we should always be learning, we should always be growing, we should always be looking for new information. That doesn't mean we kick out what is old, we kick out the things that are historic, and we kick out the things that we knew before. It just means that we should be in a constantly evolving sort of place and a generative place where we're bringing in new. I think if you do that, then when you think about the allocation of resources, you actually already are allocating resources for that because your assumption is not staff are going to just do exactly the same thing that they did today. They're going to do in 6 months' time, and it's the same thing that they did 6 months ago. You're starting to allocate staff resources with the idea of thinking, well, staff have to be constantly learning, which means if they do a workshop tomorrow and they learn something different, they have to have time and capacity to change that before they do a workshop on Friday. And so everything kind of shifts because your whole model of staffing and allocation and implementation becomes something that is focused on learning and growth and not implementing something that is static. And so I think, I mean, obviously there's also like, you know, it'd be great if we had lots of money, and it would be great if people funded for things like program implementation as opposed to just program delivery, right? Which is not how the model works. I get funded to deliver the same program I've always delivered. I don't get funded to deliver a program that should be different from day one of the funding to day end of the funding because of all of the things that we learned. But that's probably a whole other webinar.
I think, Carrie, 100%. I think that curiosity, right, and promoting that that in all of our teams is what builds that learning culture. And I find it's also a shift in mindset. So, from my experience, evaluation is always seen as a nice to have. You know, it's something that we can do if we have time, if we have resources, but been really trying to encourage folks to think about high quality clinical service as encompassing an evaluation mindset. So in order to offer that, you need to also be thinking about quality improvement and how you can enhance your or elevate your practice. And so I think being able to communicate that also encourages folks to share the responsibility of evaluation. And then it becomes part of everything that you do, right? So it's not just a nice to have at the end of the day, but rather it should be integrated workflow so that programs are thinking about what am I going to, like, how am I collecting some process data so I can understand implementation? How am I going to start collecting some feedback from clients, some outcome information? And so I find that has to be very intentional depending on the readiness of the organization. And our team, we started shifting to talking about a process rather than an outcome. So instead of positioning, you know, my team as evaluators for the organization, we actually say we're holders of a quality and service excellence process where in order to support the consistent integration of evidence into service delivery, we do two things. The first is we help initiatives build a blueprint. So we help build a roadmap based on best practices, a readiness assessment, so current state, strengths and opportunities, what clients want, all that information. And the third one, the third one is what clients want or what they prefer. And then also kind of the organizational readiness in terms of IT and infrastructure support. So then when a program has that blueprint, they can then start scaling what implementation can look like. And then we support the uptake at the as the new practice is being introduced. And so we've really been trying to tell folks, you know, we're not evaluators, we're not just, you know, implementers, but rather we offer a process that can help us systematically think through how to integrate best practices and build on what we're currently doing. I don't know if that kind of resonates, but I find it, I find hopefully that we can then start integrating, you know, quality and service excellence into everything that we do.
And I think that, you know, it's interesting to think about evaluation as a process, and research also should be thought about from that perspective of as a process, right? This is not about a research outcome. This is about a research process, right? And so if you think about that, if you build that culture internally, then when you start to include other people externally, it becomes easier to say research for us is not an outcome. Research is a process, and we're gonna approach it in the same way that we approach the way that we look at evaluation and feedback within our existing work, we're going to do that within our new work that we're looking at.
No,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I have a quote from Carrie. I want to make sure I'm not, it is you that said something along this lines, but the idea of always growing into continuously evolving resources. And if we're working for services that are focused on adversity and violence, very pervasive issues, and we continue to grow, eventually the services won't be needed because we've tackled it. We've done the
Yeah.
thing going forward.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
We should be trying to work ourselves out of a job.
Good job. Yes, I agree.
Right? I don't want to have to exist. And if I if I have that mentality within my organizational culture, then research becomes a really easy part of that, because we all believe that we need to learn more so that we can, not to learn more just to make ourselves, more sustainable. We need to learn more so that we can make ourselves not needed. It's just it's a mindset shift, but it is, I think, really, really impactful.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you guys both talked about like integrating service excellence and curiosity into the workflow and just being very big champions of this work and always striving for better in your organization and making sure staff is being accommodated accordingly to provide potential changes into the workflow. So thank you so much for highlighting that. I truly appreciate it. And then kind of moving forward about for those who've implemented evidence-based programs, what are some of the most unexpected operational challenges? And what internal factors such as leadership stability or staff engagement help sustain the new practice? And I wrote this down that Connie's going first.
I was hoping Carrie could take this one too. That's a really good question. I think why I'm having so much trouble kind of thinking about how to answer this is because it's very difficult in kind of currently where I'm at to implement an evidence-informed kind of approach, simply because our department's very new. But we are kind of participating in more rigorous evaluation initiatives. And what we find is that because the idea of evidence-informed practice and practicing that in a formal way, we don't have all the necessary infrastructure to support it. So we don't have a data collection platform. We don't have a real standardized way of managing client outcome data, right? And so as we're kind of working on this project, it's like almost double or triple the work, because not only are we trying to promote that learning culture and building capacity across the teams, but we're also trying to build the infrastructure at the same time. So I think depending on the organizational readiness of an organization, the experience of introducing kind of like an evidence-informed practice, evidence-informed intervention or whatnot can look very different depending on the existing infrastructure that's in place. We're hoping to maybe in a couple of years be out of this phase of development, but it is like a process, I think, of organizational growth that we're currently experiencing.
Totally. When I look at this, I think the thing that I think about, and so I think the thing that I think about is that I feel really, really, really connected and really grounded in the fact that at the end of the day, I'm not in charge. The community and the service users are in charge. And so I think that for me, I feel really strongly that my role is to be able to take evidence, take information, take these things, and then say to community, what does this look like for you? And how would we do this for you? And what feels like it fits and what feels like it doesn't fit, and how do we adjust? And so one of the challenges I think that we have at Sagesse is that idea of fidelity, right? Research fidelity often to me is about the actions, the direct, we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this. And when I think about fidelity, I think about fidelity from an outcome. So what are we trying to achieve? And how do we use this information to help to get there? And that doesn't always align. And so I think that for me, those unexpected operational challenges always for me come up in the actual implementation operations of, you might think that this needs to be done, right? That 4 times a week at 12 o'clock for 20 minutes. But actually, if the community says to me, well, I can actually do this 5 times a week for 15 minutes at 4:15, I'm gonna be more inclined to want to go with community. And so I think that the operational challenges there become about really understanding, what does fidelity actually mean? What are we testing against? What are we implementing against? And how do we create things that are, again, based off of an idea and a goal and a shared vision and an outcome versus a here's the script and we have to do exactly that sort of thing. And so for me, the challenge when looking at this always comes from that place of empowerment, and how do we empower? Because if I say to the staff, you have to do exactly this, I know what my staff will say to me. Maybe this is because I've created a culture where they feel very comfortable saying to me, absolutely not, we're not going to do that. But that's good. That's their job, right? They're the people on the front end who their job is to be able to say, we know that clients can't come at 12 o'clock because they're feeding, that's when they feed their kids lunch or whatever that might be. And so I think that the ability to work out empowerment and how empowerment works within these spaces is really, really important. And how do we understand within evidence-based programming where the role of empowerment and um, uh, innovation and feedback lives, so that we can implement that. And that would always be something that I would look at before I would agree to take on some sort of new program. Is I would say, do you have a fidelity model that means you're going to hand me a box and I have to do exactly what's in that? Or do you have a fidelity model, or do you have an evidence model that says, here are the things, here's the roadmap, and here's all of the spaces where you get to make those adjustments along the way? And that's really hard for us because we do feel so rooted in what community is saying and what community needs. And my bias is to always move towards that direction.
Yes, thank you so much, both of you. I think it's really important that you highlight the very unexpected operational challenges. Obviously, that is this implementing evidence-informed practices or programs are going to, as you mentioned, Connie, triple the work. So you have to be very cognizant of the structures at play. But also, thank you, Carrie, for really diving into that. Community is foremost, you're going to be your priority, and making sure that their voices are going to be heard, especially when implementing evidence-based programs where there has to be some conversation with implementation from the jump, that maybe something's not going to work out the way that we planned it, and we have to be adaptable and flexible and go back to the drawing board of like the knowledge action cycle of like, we're going to have to go back to a stage below before we can go forward. So I really appreciate you diving into that.
I think, sorry to add, I think that's why the developmental evaluation approach is so powerful, because it allows us to create that continuous feedback and constantly revise and reflect on what's working, what's not working.
But is also, as you said, Connie, super labor intensive.
Yes.
Absolutely necessary, super labor intensive and expensive and cumbersome to create.
So we can't do it all the time, but it's about picking and choosing kind of the right moments, I think, is also a part of the resourcing bit as well. Maybe there are moments where it's good enough, right? And being okay with good enough. And I think for me, that's the constant struggle, right? Like I want to do the best I can for everything, but it's just not possible. So as a team, how do you prioritize, and how do you, identify the big rocks that you have on your portfolio? So that's also a struggle, I think.
Being cognizant of the time, are we all right with one more question? Okay. Well, this is my most selfish question because I really want to learn more about how research can really impact health and like on community. And I'm very cognizant of like, as a master's student, I hold power and can negatively impact others or positively impact others. So I guess the question I have for you is that ultimately partnerships need to be mutually beneficial to lead to desired outcomes that I'm mentioning about, like the social and health impact of the communities that we work with, we serve. What advice would you give to researchers to ensure projects build organizational capacity, inform policy, and create lasting social impact? And I wrote you down, Carrie, as the one to go. So no ditto for
Darn it.
you.
Really hoping that was Connie. I mean, I think that for me, at the end of the day, um, the researcher has to act in many ways in service to the organization. If you're in service to yourself and your own outcomes, you're never going to be able to do that, and you're not going to create things that are going to actually allow organizational capacity to change or create policy that is rooted in community and organizational truth and readiness. And so I think that if you think about as a researcher, right, we all have our own outcomes. We all have the thing that we're striving towards, right? And so how do you know what your outcomes are? How are you really, really clear about what are the things that I need to get out of this? And then how do you show up in a place of curiosity and say, tell me about what's going on. Tell me about what works. Tell me about what doesn't work. So that you can really, really understand that. There's nothing worse than as a community organization having a researcher come to me and say, I'm going to build your organizational capacity to do something that lives 50 feet from where I am and has nothing to do with what I'm doing, and builds organizational capacity in a way that is absolutely not needed, right? And I think that things are well intended, and I think that people genuinely want to be able to help. But if you don't start from a place of understanding and curiosity and saying, tell me about where your organizational capacity is now. What are the things that are getting in the way, right? Connie just talked about the whole process of building out for developmental evaluation and building the processes and all of that. That would be great for somebody to say, I hear that you're saying that there's these gaps. How could we help to be able to support that, right? But if somebody comes in and says, I'm going to do this thing that's over here, and I assume you've already figured this part out, it's never going to really last. And so I think that for me, when I think about researchers, when I think about new researchers coming in, there's I mean, it's the same as new social workers coming in and they walk into an organization and they say, I have all of the information and I'm going to solve all of the social issues, right? We all do that because we're so excited and we want to make this social change. And I think, how do we harness that, but harness that while starting from a place of curiosity? Tell me about what's going on. Tell me about where your gaps are. Tell me about where the pinch points are. And then utilize the information that you have that I don't have to be able to say, here's how we could look at a project that might be able to build this organizational capacity. Because for me as a person in the community org, I am heads down, service delivery, doing the thing that I need to be doing. And that's what my staff are doing on a regular basis, right? I don't know the answers of, actually, there's this new thing that somebody is doing that we could test that might work out really well. I'm interested in that, but that's where I think the researcher comes in. But if the researcher walks in and says, I'm going to sell you this idea, or I have this thing that I'm chasing, it's not going to necessarily land. Versus if they say, tell me what you're chasing or what you need, and then we can figure out how to put the thing you're chasing together with the thing that I need and find those synergies.
Agreed. I think one of the opportunities that I see is really shifting some of the focus onto implementation, and supporting organizations in using the knowledge that comes. It's fantastic when researchers come back with, the findings from their research. But what I find sometimes that should happen as well is working with the organization to say, hey, how do we integrate this into your workflow? How do we make it sustainable? How do we scale it for you, right, across your organization? And I think that's the capacity building piece. And, I'm hopeful that one day that in addition to publications and conference presentations, that the ability to build capacity within an organization is also seen as a deliverable that is valued to the same extent as a peer-reviewed publication, for example, right? Because I think that changes the mindset, the culture, and it really encourages us to work together to action the knowledge that we generate.
It gets us that step closer to being able to put ourselves out of work.
Yeah,
100%.
exactly. So Carrie, maybe I'll meet you at the coffee shop and we'll just spend our days
Yeah.
there.
Sounds great. I'm in.
I really appreciated the actionable steps from both of you talking about like what building capacity for nonprofit organizations could look like and how like new researchers stepping in. Of course, we all want to like change the world or have so much optimism going into this field, but also be willing to listen and hear out who you're working with and what the gaps may be. So I truly appreciate those steps, and I will be looking forward to that going forward. We've reached the end of the questions that I have prepared, so I want to make sure they're given some time for more Q&A. Um, other than that, I want to thank you both so much, Carrie and Connie, for this engaging conversation. I certainly have learned a lot from this conversation and will use going forward. And we'll probably start, for my own thesis, we'll definitely start looking into literature, speaking to what we spoke to today. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Slide. Thank you, Jason. So yeah, doing all the things. If you have take a moment to provide feedback with the QR code up and ahead. And yeah, as I mentioned, we do webinar Wednesday every Wednesday. So there's always something going. So if you want to learn more, go to avatraining.ca. Thanks, everyone.